Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 27, and I'm reading from the New International Version. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And the Greek word there is Gehenna. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. I've been dealing a lot with the theologian Dallas Willard through this series, and I'll continue to do that. I'll be reading a quotation from him today because I think he has a line of sight on this. One of the things Dallas Willard says in his book, The Divine Conspiracy, is that Jesus is telling us the kind of freedom we can live into if we truly trust him, if we truly have faith in him. We want to define faith today. Faith is trust. Faith is not just believing these things, but behaving as though they're true. This is faith. So what's happening? God gave Israel the first step towards godliness, and it's encapsulated in the law of Moses. So we begin there, but we don't end there. And what Jesus is doing in the Sermon on the Mount is trying to show us the trajectory of the law. So this is where you start. Last week was don't murder. You start at don't murder. And Jesus then reveals that the trajectory of that law, where it's intended to point you, is towards a world in which you don't hate. He's doing the same thing here in this passage. The law said don't commit adultery. And that's where you start. Can't start following Jesus if adultery is part of your life. You have to be forgiven of that. You have to repent. You have to get back on the road. That's the starting point. But where that was headed, where don't commit adultery was headed, was towards the 10th commandment. Don't covet. Don't lust. We have to first, before we understand what Jesus is trying to help us to understand, we have to first recognize the danger we are to each other. The most dangerous creature to you and to me are other humans. And you're dangerous. You're the most intelligent creature on earth. Tend to be the most self-centered creatures on earth. And we pose a risk to everybody else. This story is as old as the scriptures and as old as humanity itself. In the Garden of Eden, before humans decided to embrace sinfulness and a way of life that God told us to avoid, which is represented by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, before they did that, humans were completely naked before each other and they felt no shame. They felt no fear. They were completely exposed. There were no walls of protection and they were not afraid. That's pretty amazing. But when they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the first thing that happened, the immediate thing that happened was that they noticed they were naked. They noticed their vulnerability, and they built the first walls ever constructed in human history. They were made out of fig leaves, but they were walls. The first consequence of sin was that humans began to fear each other, and Adam and Eve feared each other. That's why they put on clothes. And almost immediately after that story, Adam and Eve are thrown out of the Garden of Eden, and God bars them from eating from the tree of life because this corruption is way too dangerous to be allowed to live forever. And so he bars them from the garden, and they're forced to go into the wider world and make their way outside of God's sustaining life that would have given them immortality. And they have children. And within the first generation of the children they have two children. The oldest name was Cain, and the younger was named Abel. And almost immediately, when they became old enough to make sacrifices, and they become competitive with one another for God's affection, and God seems to be more pleased with what Abel's doing than with what Cain's doing. And Cain's solution is to murder his brother, get rid of the competition. He used violence as a way to protect himself, to build his own self-esteem, to protect himself from judgment. And so he took out Abel. This kind of impulse in humans makes us very dangerous for each other. But what Jesus is trying to tell us is that those who walk the road of the kingdom of the heavens, they're not safe from the world around them, but they are safe for the world around them. The road to the kingdom of the heavens is not first about making others safe for us. The road to the kingdom of the heavens is about us being safe for others. And we're going to consider Jesus' teachings on lust and adultery today. We'll begin by translating the text, because I don't do this very often, but I want to make sure you understand the language that's behind some of these terms so that you translate it adequately. So we're going to start by translating the text. Then we're going to proceed to Jesus' advice to trim the externals, the eyes and the hands things. We'll talk about that, see what Jesus is doing. And then we'll conclude with what it might mean to trust Jesus in this context and what the broader consequences of that trust might be for the people in our lives and for us ourselves. So look back at Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 to 30. I want to read it again, just the first 2 verses, and I want to translate this for you. You've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So let's define these terms. So adultery is any time there's physical intimacy between two people who are not married to each other. So sex before marriage is adultery. Sex with someone to whom you're not married is adultery. Sex with someone who is married, even if you're not, is also adultery. That's the way the Bible uses the terms. So that's adultery. Lust, there are a bunch of words that underlie this. The Greek word is epithumia, and that word means, it's the same word translated covet in the Ten Commandments. So when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, which is probably the Bible that was most popular in Jesus' day, it's called the Septuagint, the word for covet is this word, epithumia. It means essentially to take pleasure in something, to set one's heart upon something, to desire something. Coveting, lusting, they're the same term. And then let's talk about the word heart. We think of the heart as kind of the seat of the affections. I mean, love comes out of the heart, right? That's how we use the term. That is not the way it's used in the Bible. That's not what it means in the Bible. So the word heart in the scriptures, and this is coming through the Hebrew Bible and then into the New Testament, but mostly in the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew people saw the mind as the intellect, and the emotions were fixated in different parts of your physical body. So the heart, for the Hebrew people, when they speak of the heart, that's the place where the emotions and the mind meet. Where the emotions and the mind meet. And it's there that you make a decision. That's what is meant by the heart. So when Jesus says you've committed adultery in the heart, what he means is you've already committed your mind and your emotions to the act of adultery. You may not have done it yet with your body, and good, don't, because it's worse when you do. But you've committed yourself in that way. That's what he's talking about. So with those words before us, let me read a translation. There's one other thing you should know. When it says anyone who looks at a woman lustfully, it's better translated anyone who looks at a woman in order to lust after her has already committed his mind and his emotions to the act of adultery. That's what Jesus is more or less saying. So here's the translation I'm going to give you. You have heard that it was said, you shall never commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman with the intention of lusting after her has already devoted his mind and emotions to committing adultery with her. Once you hear Jesus saying it that way, what would be your response? Well, duh. I mean, of course that's true, right? Of course that's true. But why does that matter, Jesus? And that's the more important question. So let's move on where Jesus moves into. The second point is trimming the externals. Look at verses 29 and 30, and then we'll get back to those earlier verses. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. On this verse, I completely agree with Dallas Willard. I think that's ironic. I think he intends it to sound absurd. Can you fix adultery by gouging out your eyes? Can you fix the lust of the heart by simply taking away the object of seeing? No. Matter of fact, if all it took to be holy was to gouge out our eyes and cut off our limbs so we could do nothing in the world, we could all get to heaven by doing that together. But that's ridiculous, because none of that will change the heart. Cut off all the limbs you want, your heart remains. Gouge out all the eyes you have. The imagination remains. The heart remains. Jesus' point is, if you could gouge out your eye and get into heaven, you would do it. If you could cut off your hand and get to heaven, you would do it. I mean, better to do that than to go to hell, right? So you might as well. But the point is, that wouldn't work. That's what the law was trying to do. Matthew chapter 15, verse 16, Jesus says, "Are you still so dull? Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth, come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile a person, but eating with unwashed hands does not defile them." Jesus there tells us, the wickedness you're struggling with, it's not out there, it's in here. It's not a matter of your environment, it's a matter of your heart. Now, it's certainly true that the external environment can keep us in certain patterns. And once we commit ourselves to following Jesus, we may have to get out of certain circumstances. Sin is not sourced in our environments. At its core, it's sourced in our hearts. Changing the scenery will not set you free. We have to trust Jesus to show us the way to be free from who we have been. And that's what this passage is about. Our third point is trusting Jesus. Let's see if I can bring this home. Look at verse 27 again of Matthew 5. "You've heard that it was said, 'You shall never commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman with the intention of lusting after her has already committed his mind and his emotions to committing adultery with her." The act hasn't happened, but it's begun. The act hasn't happened, but it's begun. So I'm going to read a fairly lengthy quotation from Dallas Willard. So in this area, Jesus is not exactly making points unheard of among human beings. All except those committed to self-justification will understand clearly what he's talking about and will recognize that it's not good. He says simply that those who look upon a woman for the purpose of lusting for her, using her visual presence as a means of savoring the fantasized act, has thereby committed adultery with her in his heart. In other words, all the elements of a genuine act of adultery, other than the overt movements of the body, are present in such a case. The heart elements are there. Usually the only thing lacking for overt action is the occasion. When the heart is ready, the action will occur as the occasion offers. Just as the thief is the person who would steal if circumstances were right, so the adulterer is the one who would have wrongful sex if the circumstances were right. Usually that means if he or she could be sure it would not be found out. This is what Jesus calls adultery in the heart. In it, the person is not caring for, but using the other. The condition is wrong even though sexual relations did not occur. When one is inhabited by fantasizing, visual lusting, it, like anger and contempt, makes its presence known. It's detectable in one's body language and expressions. As a result, it has pervasive effects on everyone in the situation, even though it is not acted out. Indeed, being what it is, a condition of the embodied social self, it is always acted out to some degree and simply cannot be kept a private reality. The look is a public act with public effects that restructure the entire framework of personal relations where it occurs. The person subjected to the fantasy, as well as others alongside, is deeply affected by such lusting, and it nearly always produces some degree of inappropriate action, including all of the behavior now classified as sexual harassment. Indeed, it is in itself a form of harassment, unless it is invited. The person subjected to it and everyone else nearby must deal with it, often by constant planning and managing. Sexual harassment as we know it would simply disappear under Jesus' ethic of sexuality. That's the end of the quotation. We often think of the road to the kingdom of the heavens as a road that's best when we are safe from the assaults of others. But the truth of Jesus' teachings is that the road to follow him goes through some pretty dangerous territory and we will not always be safe from those outside of the kingdom. The problem with believing that the real goal of life is to protect me from the dangers that others pose to me is that it puts the focus of holiness on our environment. We focus on other people's behavior, on other people's wardrobes, on other people's interactions with us. However, the road we walk following Jesus passes through those kinds of situations all the time. Those who follow Jesus are not safe from the world, but we are safe for the world. The Me Too movement, the Church Too movement, has begun to show humanity again how violent lust is, how aggressive it is, how much fear it engenders. One of my favorite passages in the book of Job is in Job chapter 31, verse 1. I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman. I agreed with my eyes that I would not look at someone with the intent to lust after them. Lust is like a predator looking for prey. That's what lust is. It's the eye of a predator. It makes everyone prey. And those who see the look and feel its gaze become afraid. And it changes how they interact, and it ripples through the world. And this lustful, covetous, envious instinct is so heavy to bear, both for us and for others. It feeds a discontentment in us that robs us of peace. And unless it's invited, it is a form of aggression against others and violence against them. We're always on the hunt, and others feel the fear of being prey. So here's the good news of the gospel. The good news of the gospel, church, is that you don't need your lust to be happy. You have enough. This is the good news of Jesus. You have enough. You don't need any more than you have right now. You have your daily bread. If you could believe it, you could be free. The person you've married is enough for you. And you are enough for them. If we trust Jesus, we can dispense with the idea that more will make me happier, that different will fill me with peace, that a change of the environment will result in a change of who I am, and it won't. It's trusting Jesus that sets us free. And I want to remind us what Jesus is saying. Human beings have the ability to recognize aesthetically pleasing things. That is a normal human instinct. You can hear music and love it, and know it's good music, know it's bad music. You can see art, know it's good art, know it's bad art. You can look at a person and know they're an aesthetically pleasing person or a non-aesthetically pleasing person to you. You can look at a person and interact with them and know if they have a character that's aesthetically pleasing or a character that is not to you. You can do that. That's an instinct. That's not lust. Recognizing someone is attractive, recognizing a thing is beautiful, recognizing that an item is worthwhile, that is not lust. That's not what he's talking about. Remember Jesus' words. It's intentionally looking at a person in order to lust. It's engaging with the fantasy. It's intending not just to recognize beauty, but to wish to possess it, to use it for your own ends, to use it for your own gratification. That's the lust he's talking about, and that is the lust you don't need. If you're discontent, you don't need to lust to find happiness. In fact, it will create and breed a discontent in you that will keep you miserable. You will be free the day you trust Jesus to handle that situation you're using lust to manage. And not only will you be set free, but the whole world around you will change.